This is Joe Morse. You are listening to the History of Aviation podcast with Derrick Beeler, David Rowe, and David Gorman.
All right, I want to welcome everybody into the History of Aviation podcast for episode number 17. We got a great plane for you. And as well, thanks for listening to the podcast. We definitely are growing, and we're very happy about that. And as always, I'm joined by Mr. David Rowe and Dave Gorman. How are you guys doing? Starting with you, David Rowe.
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much. It's been a good couple of days here. Had some really good flyovers. Did a E3 today and a couple of helicopters. And so been outside looking up for a change. The weather's finally behaving itself. So enjoying that. And have to brag on my daughter. We had a student art exhibition last night at her ETSU college, and she won the drawing award. So we enjoyed that evening last night, watching her drawing skills be recognized. So good couple of days here.
Good deal. Dave Gorman.
Well, that's awesome. Glad to hear about all her talents. I know you had to be very proud of her.
Very much so.
Good. Well, things here are good. I've been taking pictures more of birds lately than airplanes. Got some hawks that are really active around my school, and we were outside for quite a bit today. And so I got pictures of hawks and some falcons that were kind of chasing each other through the sky. Kind of neat to see. Big, broad wings and everything. But everything else is going pretty well. Looking forward to talking about another fantastic, incredible plane, and one that we're really lucky to be able to see so close to us. Here in East Tennessee, we have one that flies regularly. So the Skyraider, a great one.
Yeah, absolutely. That's key right there. As a matter of fact, I was going back looking through my Aerophile YouTube channel, and I've got videos of that Tennessee Museum of Aviation Skyraider going back 12 years. So I've got some really old videos of us visiting the museum and watching this plane fly. It's a really great airplane. It's big and strong, looks good, sounds good. It's kind of a big brute. It's a hulk of an airplane, carries a whole lot of weight. And we've actually got some sound bite here. So let's take a listen to the Skyraider starting up and taking off.
Sounds impressive. And again, like I said, we're lucky that we can see and hear one in the East Tennessee area on a somewhat regular basis. So beautiful aircraft. This plane was originally designed for the Navy. Is that correct?
Yes, it was. An interesting story about that. Douglas is the company that built this aircraft, and Ed Heinemann was having meetings with the Navy regarding an earlier version of this plane called the Destroyer. And there were some other competing aircraft that were better. It's called the Mauler. And so he just said, well, let's forget about the Destroyer. We're going to show you a brand new plane tomorrow morning. And he and two designers went back to a hotel overnight. And, based on their knowledge, they sketched out the Skyraider design, went back the next morning and showed the Navy brass and said, this is what we want to build for you, the Skyraider. And the Navy looked at it and said, well, you've got 9 months, build it and let us see it because we like the design. And it took 9 months and 1 day, and they had a Skyraider flying. And the rest is history from that point.
It came out at a time when the world was moving to jet aviation. It was late World War II. When it was designed, it didn't see service in World War II. It was available for Korea, but there was so much attention and excitement and money that was being paid towards jet aviation. And so this plane was kind of an anachronism in a way that it was that it survived all that change and survived to perform admirably in the Korean War for the U.S. Navy, and then again into the Vietnam War and some other nations.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the great. It's literally one of the most versatile airplanes ever built. Started out in 1946. Like you said, it was a remnant of World War II, prop, big and powerful, and everybody's looking at the jets, but this plane could do things that the jets couldn't do. It could fly low, slow, it could hang around for hours on end, and it made it a platform that the jets just weren't quite ready to master yet. It would be a few years down the road when another rather famous airplane called the Warthog came along to kind of fill the gap that the Skyraider left behind.
Much the same mission, right?
Exactly. Ground
Just
attack.
a big flying tank that had lots of hard points and could take a beating.
Yeah, exactly. The Skyraider had 15 hard points underneath its wings. It's really a bomber, but it has no bomb bay. All of the bombs that it could carry, and at the time it was designed, it could carry all the weapons in the arsenal, all the bombs, rockets, whatever they had, it could carry, and it carried them on the wings, which is pretty amazing. It slung everything out in the air and went to battle with it.
When I was reading about Ed Heinemann's involvement, he's one of those fantastic, well-known, famous aircraft designers. He did the Skyhawk. Having a guy like that was, kind of like Kelly Johnson, a guy that could just visualize something that could fly. He just understood the dimensions and the drafting and the what it took. But I read that he didn't think about a future design for the engine. He thought, well, I'm going to design something around the biggest engine, the best engine that we have. And sometimes you hear about planes that kind of get stranded in their design because they're reaching towards an engine that hasn't quite been perfected yet. But that's not true with Skyraider. It had that big engine in front and was ready to go from day one, basically.
Exactly. It's the same engine that powered the B-29 Super Fortress. It was also the same engine that flew the Constellation, the passenger airliner. So yes, it was a well-developed, well-understood engine. And so there wasn't a long development period to get it working. It was pretty much ready to go. And it's a pretty powerful engine, a Wright 3350. So it's got a lot of power built in.
I was reading some about the design. You mentioned the XBT-2D1, that first, the destroyer, I think it was called.
Correct, destroyer.
And they had a pretty good design that they were working on, but they wanted to see if they could save any weight on it. And so, they've realized that if they could take some weight off of that plane, it could fly faster and loiter longer and all that kind of stuff. And they began to change the fuel system, got rid of the external bomb or the internal bomb bay, like you said, used a fuselage dive brake, a different tail wheel design, all these types of things. They saved 1,800 pounds of weight and improved the performance of that plane. And so they applied some of those lessons to the Skyraider as well. So they're already thinking about, how do we make the best, fastest, longest loitering, hard point, loaded up aircraft for all these roles that it excelled in. And, they were definitely up to the task.
Well, this is the culmination of the single engine piston powered aircraft for military use. They took all of that knowledge from all of World War II and before and put it into this aircraft. And, they created an absolute winner. And speaking of the Lightning taking out all the weight that they could, that actually created a few problems later in life where there were some stress fractures and some, areas where they had to go back in and re-beef it up. Because, slamming that plane down on a carrier deck, that's a really hard thing on an airplane. And so some of that Lightning had to be reversed in order to beef it up to survive the landing. And I also read that the pilots had to alter their landing, the way they did it a little bit to help the longevity of the aircraft. So, that it was absolutely necessary to make it as light as possible, but to keep it strong, you have to, beef it up as well.
Well, now, if I understand correctly, as we mentioned at the opening, this was originally designed for the U.S. Navy. So were all Skyraiders built for the Navy, therefore with a tail hook?
Yes,
think
because
that's
the Air Force took them from the Navy, I believe, is how that works.
Yeah.
So yes, they should, unless the Air Force took them off. The planes that the Air Force got were originally from the Navy.
So that's why you see a tail hook on Lieutenant America, for example.
Correct. Exactly.
So I got to believe if you're flying a plane like this, having that big engine out in front of you has got to help. You feel you got a little bit of metal to hide behind, but they also did some armor plating around the cockpit too, right?
Yes, it was very heavily armored for the pilot's protection. It was an extremely tough airplane, could take a lot of battle damage. I was listening to one pilot talk about there were 4 Skyraiders and a couple of bird dogs that had gone out for a mission. And when they came back and landed, they counted over 600 holes in the 6 aircraft. So, I mean, they were capable of taking a lot of hits and bringing the pilots home.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Man. And, I always laugh when you hear some of the ways that this plane was called a SPAD, as pilots of other faster jets would sometimes demean the pilots of a Skyraider and called it a SPAD, which was the French World War I aircraft. They were talking about it being so slow, but my gosh, I've had the opportunity to meet a few Skyraider pilots. They absolutely love this plane. They love the missions. They love the platforms. They loved all the things they could carry. And as we keep talking about, it's loiter time. This plane was involved in a lot of low to the ground strafing and protecting the troops who were being in danger of being overrun, or helping to coordinate the rescue of other pilots, downed pilots and air crewmen. It really played a major role, and a very human role in the Vietnam War. But originally it was serving the Navy in Korea. And did I read it actually shot down a MiG? Skyraider pilot shot down a MiG?
Well, not in Korea. I think that was that Vietnam? I'm trying to remember which one it was, because I think Korea, they shot down a Soviet-built PO-2 biplane, is what my notes say. Major George Linemir, and he shot down a Soviet-built Polikarpov PO-2 biplane, the only documented Skyraider victory of Korea.
That's right. I think they got a MiG or 2 in Vietnam, but yes, this wasn't an air-to-air platform, really, was it? Skyraider really wasn't designed for that kind of thing.
It was not designed for that, but it was very maneuverable and could go into that realm if necessary. But yes, it was not designed to be a sleek, pretty fighter. If you look at it, it's big flat sides, thick, it looks heavy, not streamlined. It's not a Spitfire. So you get what you see. It's heavy, it's hard. Speaking of names, you were talking about the different names that they had called it. It had a bunch. Some of the more popular ones was the Able Dog. One of the things we haven't talked about is this plane had multiple names. It started out as the Destroyer. Then it became the AD-1. So they called that plane the Able Dog. And when the military decided to consolidate all of the names of aircraft, it became the A-1 Skyraider. So some other names, the Sandy, when it was doing search and rescue, flying dump truck. There's actually a 2-place tandem seating aircraft. They called that one the Fat Face for obvious reasons, because it's much thicker and fatter. And the South Vietnamese had a really interesting name, Crazy Water Buffalo.
Wow. Well, that's pretty evocative, but, gives you an idea of maybe the missions that it flew for them as well.
Yes. Well,
And
speaking of mission,
there were Vietnam, South Vietnamese pilots that flew the Skyraider.
yes. As a matter of fact, Vietnam started and ended with the Vietnam pilots flying the aircraft. So we supplied South Vietnam with the Skyraiders before we were involved. We had pilots over there showing them how to fly and probably taking part in some of the flights that they were doing. And then as we were ending the war and trying to get out, we left Skyraiders in the South Vietnamese hands, and they finished the war fighting with the Skyraiders. And we've one of the reasons we have the Tennessee Museum of Aviation has a Skyraider is because one of those Skyraiders was left in Vietnam, and some very bold pilots went and picked them up and brought them home. Roger Youngblood and Mr. Drummond flew 4 Skyraiders out of Vietnam back into Thailand and literally saved them, combat veterans. So there are 4 of them that they got, and they're still out there and still flying today, which is pretty amazing. Tennessee Museum of Aviation's got one. Cavanaugh Flight Museum in Addison, Texas has one. The National Air and Space Museum in DC has one. And the Colorado Springs Museum of World War II Aviation has one. So 4 combat veterans saved by Roger Youngblood and Drummond.
Goodness gracious. And we've had Youngblood, and I think Drummond has also been in Sevierville for presentations to recognize their efforts to save those planes and get them to safety. And also some of the missions, to highlight some of the missions that these guys flew in Vietnam, some hairy stuff. And, there are not a lot of World War II pilots around to tell us of their exploits and one-to-one conversations or presentations. It's happening with Vietnam veterans as well. And although it's been a few years since we've had a presentation in Sevierville, hopefully they'll be able to get these guys back again. The Alpha group that's shared some of their stories. They're pretty harrowing missions, but boy, oh boy, those guys had a great sense of camaraderie and unit cohesion and patriotism. They're fantastic men and deserve all the honor and praise that we could give them.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. They really they put in the work, and they partied hard and they fought hard, and it shows. Those Skyraider reunions are just amazing. There's some videos out there. Our friend Bruce sent me a link to one, and I was watching through it, and one of the pilots, a Win Deporter, was talking about he actually wrecked 2 Skyraiders in one day. And this is indicative of the type of flying that the Skyraider does. He was out on a mission, and there was somebody trying to, help some troops and was dropping white phosphorus, and, they weren't hitting the target. And so he went in with napalm, got really low, flew through the white phosphorus smoke, dropped his napalm on target. And when he pulled out, he met some trees, tore up his airplane a little bit, but he got it back to the base, got out. Later that day, he went back out, much the same thing, supporting some troops, got too low, flew through some smoke. And then he really smacked a tree, flew it back, and that plane never flew again. He had to put it into the scrapyard. And so he killed two Skyraiders in one day. And interesting, in the video later on, he's talking about another accident he had later where 2 of the Skyraiders collided, and one of the other Skyraider pilots made the joke, "Well, you just need 2 more and you're an ace win."
Some good-natured ribbing is always comes in hand. Well, speaking of other funny stories, David, you have a picture behind you on your screen that we could see of some rather interesting ordnance.
Yes. One of the most interesting stories about the Skyraider is they dropped a toilet bowl on North Vietnam. One of the last flights of a cruise, 1965, a Commander Clarence Stoddard, VA-25, was the XO flying an A-1H Skyraider, Paper Tiger II. And they had an extra broken toilet, and they decided, let's drop it on on the North Vietnamese. So they made a rack, they put tail fins and a nose fuse on it, and they attached it to one of the pylons. Well, while they were doing this, they did it back and hid it so that the commander of the ship could not see it. So there were a lot of people involved. They hid it. They got it on to the CAT to launch. And just as the plane is starting to take off, the captain of the ship looks down and he's like, what the hell was that on 572's right wing? And then too late, the plane's gone. So the other interesting part is once they got to the target, Commander Stoddard was going in and with his wingman, and he dropped that toilet bowl. Well, it fell forward, and the bowl part caught the wind and went flipping backwards and almost took out his wingman. It was that close.
Whoa.
Yeah. And
well, seemed like a good idea at the time.
Well, exactly. It was funny. They called it was codenamed Santa Flush. And so yes, that's one of the more fun stories of the toilet bomb that the Skyraider dropped. I don't know how many people can say that. You know, we've had bazookas on little small airplanes, but this was a toilet bowl dropped on the enemy.
I'm glad it was commemorated with the picture. And as we were talking before the show, there was a model kit that I've seen where you can build that particular plane, Paper Tiger 2, complete with toilet bowl. So pretty fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
But let's talk about conventional. What would a conventional load look like? How much and what kind of things might a Skyraider have under its wings, which, by the way, fold because it was designed to fit on carriers. And that's a really cool treat to see in Sevierville or other places with the Skyraider that's taxiing and folding or unfolding its wings. But what would they put underneath there?
Well, it came attached with 4 20 millimeter cannons. I think they held 200 rounds each, so you had about 800 rounds, or 400 rounds. I doubled it up there. Anyway, cannons, so could hold up to about 10,000 pounds of bombs, rockets, cluster munitions, gun pods, flares, napalm, white phosphorus, extra fuel, any assortment of that with 15 hard points, literally whatever you wanted. The outer hard points were typically little rockets or smaller bombs. The heavy stuff, the wet stuff, was all inside the wheels and underneath the fuselage.
Including toilet bowls.
Yeah.
Goodness gracious.
Yeah.
So there were losses, of course, and this plane, due to the nature of its mission, was low and slow, and down there where the guys were, you know, protecting them, flying overhead and helping to coordinate rescues and things like that. But there were losses, and how many? There was more than one Medal of Honor that was earned by a pilot flying the Skyraider, or just the one?
No, there were actually two Medal of Honors. Let me see where my note is. Yes. There is one Skyraider that is in Dayton, Ohio at the Air Force Museum. That is the Medal of Honor aircraft that Major Bernard Fisher flew in March of '66. He flew in and rescued another major, Jump Myers, in a A-Shaw Special Forces camp. So he went in, picked him up, flew him back home, earned the Medal of Honor for it. And that aircraft you can actually see at the museum. The second one was a Colonel William A. Jones III, who did a 1968 mission. So he flew in, had massive damage to his aircraft. His plane was on fire. He was seriously burned, but he returned to base and reported the position of a downed U.S. airman so that they could go back and get him. So 2 Medal of Honors in the Skyraider.
That's an incredible record. Again, with that mission, you were bound to be taking enemy fire most of the time, but some brave pilots and a plane that was definitely up to that mission.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the most famous things that the Skyraider did were the Sandy missions, where they rescued downed pilots. And they literally could hover around the wherever that pilot was, and just anytime somebody came in, they could shoot up the area and suppress the fire so those Jolly Green helicopters could come in. They called it trolling for fire when they would fly low and try to get somebody to shoot at them. So they would reveal their position. They just turn right back around and, shoot them up. So they flew low and slow. This is an interesting thing. I had never heard this. Have you ever heard of juicy fruit in relation to rescuing a pilot?
No, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
You have. Okay. Apparently they would drop gas, a knockout gas, around the pilot, and to knock out any of the people on the ground or in the tree, because usually the pilots would try to hide in trees, and if they could. And this would knock out the people around so that the helicopter could come in, take the guy down, and let him pick up the pilot and get out of there before everybody woke up. And this was called juicy fruit. So they would tell the pilot, if you're in a tree, strap yourself in because we're dropping some juicy fruit.
I never heard that.
Yeah, that was new to me as well. That's an interesting way of getting the job done. And okay, here I just saw my note. During the Vietnam War, Navy Skyraider shot down 2 North Vietnamese MiG-17s. June 20th of 65 was Lieutenant Clinton B. Johnson and Lieutenant Charles Hartman. So yes, 2 MiG-17s in Vietnam.
Man.
Really a great plane. I've got a couple of personal stories with the Skyraider myself. About 10, 12 years ago, the Virginia Museum of Aviation sent their Skyraider down to a little place in Virginia up between Marion and Wytheville, Virginia. It's about an hour from where I live. It was a little small fly-in, and I drove up there just to see what shows up. And they have a Skyraider sitting there. And so I got to talking to the pilot, and he was like, well, you want to sit in it? So I was able to climb into the Skyraider and sit in the cockpit for about 5 or 10 minutes, take some pictures. It was a wonderful thing to do. Really appreciate them letting me do that. Got some pictures of me sitting in the cockpit and just loved it. Got out of the airplane, got down to the ground and looked at my pants. And I had so much oil and grease on those shorts. I have never been able to wear them again. They are completely ruined, but they are covered in Skyraider juice.
Well,
so
you probably had mixed feelings about that. I don't know if it was worth it, but that's pretty cool.
It was very cool. And then the cool part of that exact day, I drove from Virginia to the Tennessee Museum of Aviation and saw Lieutenant America fly that day. So I actually saw 2 Skyraiders on one Saturday just by driving 100 miles in either direction from me. So that was a really great day.
Now, that first one, did you say that was from the Virginia Aviation Museum?
Yes. Was it 503?
I think that's the one. And that's a dark blue painted
Correct.
Up as the Navy.
Yes.
And those planes in Korea, that dark blue Skyraider has a distinction that's kind of cool too, with something that they dropped. They had a special mission up against a dam, right?
That's correct. Yeah, they destroyed a dam that way. They dropped some. Well, I mean, it's a torpedo plane, so
aerial torpedoes. Yeah.
Correct. Something else that's interesting. Did you know the Skyraider is a nuclear capable bomber? That it can drop nuclear bombs. There was a version that was specifically built to do that. It wouldn't drop them conventionally like a B-29 would or a B-52. They would do the little toss version where you would zoom in, pull up, release the bomb, and immediately turn around and go the opposite direction. So while the bomb was kind of flying up and back down, but nuclear capable, that's another feature that, the Skyraider has. Extremely versatile.
Well, you have to believe that those pilots know that they're not going to be scooting out of there that fast. So it's a brave man hitting that pickle pin and dropping that bomb. My goodness.
Yeah, I don't know that they ever actually did
Right.
drop the bomb, but it was capable of it. That's, something you build into it because you don't know, you might need it.
That's exactly right. They'd practice those flight profiles, wouldn't they?
I'm sure they did a lot of that.
So as we've been saying, this is one that there is a flying example just up the road from us and down the road for you from the Tri-Cities area, but up from Knoxville. And several of these Skyraiders and various paint schemes fly regularly in the U.S. and elsewhere, which is pretty amazing because this is a 70-year-old aircraft, almost 80 years old, right?
Correct. It was built starting in 1945, 46 is when they started building it. Went into service, I think, in 46. They stopped building it in 1957. So roughly 10 years of building. It flew. The last known use of the Skyraider in combat was in about 1979 in Chad. So it flew from 47 to almost 1980. So it flew a long, long time.
Goodness.
Yes.
Well, here's some trivia for you. They did actually make an appearance in World War II, but in a movie that it took me a long time to figure out what I was looking at there. I thought, well, those are strange looking thunderbolts. I bet you know what movie I'm talking about.
The Longest Day.
The Longest Day. They've got Skyraiders, a flight of them flying over. And I'm like, look at that thing. What is that? And my friend Google helped me with that. So answered a lot of questions.
There are a lot of movies with the Skyraider in it. I actually have a list. The Bridges of Toko-Ri, The Green Berets, Flight of the Intruder, We Are Soldiers, Werner Herzog's Rescue Dawn. And then, like you said, The Longest Day was a flight of P-47s, which were actually Skyraiders. So interesting stuff there.
Yeah.
I've got another interesting story. We've been talking about the Sandy missions that the Skyraider participated in. Well, I actually met a man that was picked up on one of these missions. His name is Kenny Wayne Fields. He wrote a book called Streetcar 304. And I read the book and went and met him at the Hickory Aviation Museum in North Carolina many years ago. And he was actually one of the people. He got shot down in an A-7 Corsair II, and it took them 3 days. I think this is maybe the longest rescue mission for a downed pilot in Vietnam. The story he's told is fascinating about evading and contacting the FAC pilots and getting everything arranged so that he can be picked up, and the Sandy pilots coming in and clearing out the area. So I've actually met a man who was rescued during one of these Sandy missions, and he was very appreciative of the Skyraiders, spoke very fondly of them.
Again, it had to be a real comfort at an awful time for those guys that bailed out or crash landed in the jungle and under enemy fire, sometimes behind lines that maybe they weren't supposed to be behind, and knowing that there were people in these aircraft coming in to provide some cover, some support, maybe just talk to them over the radio. The feelings that those veterans have for the Skyraider pilots are something that lifelong and deeply felt.
Yeah, I'm sure the slogan that the rescue pilots lived under was that others may live. So they were putting their life on the line, so to make sure that these other people would get out alive.
And quite literally, that some did pay the ultimate price, trying to go in and rescue or provide protection.
Yes, on that Streetcar 304, one of the Skyraider pilots, I think actually two Skyraiders were shot down. One pilot was rescued. The other pilot was captured and spent the remainder of the war in Vietnam, North Vietnamese possession.
Well, now we know that this plane saw service with the Republic of South Vietnam, And also, you mentioned in the war in Chad and Africa, some other nations that used it include which ones?
France. Let me see. What was that? I've got a list here. Lost it. There were several. Yeah, exactly. There's lots of notes here. Oh, here it is. All right. So countries that used the Skyraider included all three branches of the United States, Air Force, Marine Corps, and the Navy, Cambodia, Central African Republic, Chad, France, Gabon, South Vietnam, Thailand, Sweden, the United Kingdom, and ultimately the North Vietnamese used it because they received a few after the end of the Vietnam War.
Well, it certainly had some long legs, and it probably was a plane that, again, it came out at a time in between, when there was a lot of transition to jets. It proved its value. It served a long, long time. There were probably attempts to remove it from service over the years. And it does kind of remind me of the other plane that you mentioned there near the top, Dave, the A-10 Thunderbolt, a plane that the Air Force is trying to get rid of. And who knows what when its final demise may come. But we sure are lucky again to have a flying example. And this is an aircraft that commands and deserves respect. It proved its worth and value over and over again in combat, and just a great plane to see in the air anytime you get a chance.
Yeah, or actually go to a museum and look at it. Stand next to this thing because it is big. It's tall. I think it's like 12 feet in the air is the tail. As a matter of fact, that was one of the things I didn't really realize is the fat face version of the Skyraider, the two pilots in front, they actually increased the tail by 50%. So if you look at the single seat versus the dual seat, that tail is huge on that plane. So they had to really beef it up to handle it. And actually, if you go to the Tennessee Museum of Aviation and walk to the back of the aircraft and look at the tail, get right in the center and look right down up to the cockpit, you will see that the rudder is angled to the right. It's not straight. It's angled to offset the torque of the engine. It's so powerful that even, pushing your rudder pedals in isn't enough. You've got to have built in to the rudder that angle to offset the power of that right 3350. So,
wow.
Yeah, power, lots and lots of power on these aircraft. I mean, it's ultimate. It's the ultimate airplane.
We're talking about
ground attack. Yep. Sorry.
Oh, you're fine. About the Skyraider guy. Starting with you, David.
Well, like I was saying, this is sort of the ultimate attack aircraft of the 50s and 60s and 70s. It was extremely versatile, very capable aircraft, could do whatever you wanted, was a great flying, a good platform to fight and do things. It's probably the most effective ground support aircraft ever. The Warthog fans might say differently, but I mean, this plane fought in 2 different wars, and it took about 4 different aircraft to replace it. I mean, it did anti-submarine warfare, so they had the tracker that came on to replace it. They had the Sky Warrior to do bombing missions. That was to replace it. They had the A-4 Skyhawk to do a light attack. That was a replacement. And ultimately, it was the A-6 Intruder that replaced it. So, I mean, it took 4 airplanes to replace 1. That's how good this plane was. It's just, it proved itself in an era when everything was trying to be jet powered. It was the perfect plane at the right time for that gap. And if there's any criticism you can make about the airplane, is they did not build enough of them.
Dave Gorman.
Boy, that was an excellent summary there. But this is another plane that evokes some emotion in me and some feeling, some personal response to it. Just seeing them fly. I think I've got 3 or 4 Lieutenant America hats, and at least that many shirts. I've got pins and patches. I sure appreciate our friends up in Sevierville at the Tennessee Museum of Aviation, Neil Melton and his whole crew up there, hosting and maintaining Lieutenant America for people to enjoy. And they've brought people here to talk about this plane because it's such a beautiful flying example. I didn't know much about the Skyraider until I saw this one come to Sevierville. And Dave, you mentioned 10 or 12 years ago, we were all there taking pictures when it was flying for the first time locally, and so excited to see it. Now that won't ever change. It's been one that has gotten out to some other regional air shows, and I'm always proud to see it there because people hawk around it. It's got great nose art, and people like to get pictures made in front of it and underneath the nose and everything. Just a fantastic aircraft, and one that is legendary, and glad to be able to spend some time talking with you guys about it.
Yes, wonderful, great plane. Well, I have got Aerophile, like I was saying earlier. I've got, I think, about 14 or 15 videos of Skyraiders in my Aerophile YouTube channel. So if you want to see Lieutenant America from the Tennessee Museum of Aviation, there's a bunch of those. And I've got recently went to Atlanta and got some video of the fat face version, so you can see the big dual seat version. And so go check out aerophile.com and see some Skyraider videos.
I was going to say, if I want to see Skyraider videos, that's where I go, Aerophile. I have to laugh because at one point I was bragging to David that I had a video on my channel that had like 40,000 views. And he's like, oh, that's nice. And he kindly mentioned that he had some with, well over 10 times as many. I do have a video of a Skyraider showing the startup and taxi, and it's been pretty popular for a while. Our example here in Sevierville. You can look at those videos at Gormania. That's my YouTube channel, and some aviation content on my Instagram as well, which is _it's Dave Gorman.
Well, all right, guys, had a great time.
Absolutely enjoyed it. Looking forward to the next one.
Sure did. We can't wait to do this again next week.
Our social media for the show is listed down below. Check all of that out. So for Dave Gorman, David Rowe, I'm Derrick Beeler. Thanks for listening to the History of Aviation podcast.
This is Joe Morse. You are listening to the History of Aviation podcast with Derrick Beeler, David Rowe, and David Gorman.